Hey friends, it's Randy Moss with Randy Moss Wellness and Free Spirit Academy, and today I want to talk about healing binge eating and emotional eating and overeating and compulsive eating and really any sort of painful relationship with food without excess amounts of control and using very little willpower. So if you're anything like me, you might think that you are the most out of control person in the world around food, and I promise you, you are not. There are a lot of people that can relate with you, and I was absolutely one of them. I, for most of my life, could out-eat any full-grown man that I knew. I could pack away more food than any human that I knew. Growing teenage boys that I knew, I could eat myself to the point of, not having to make myself throw up because my body would just do it naturally. That is the extreme that it got to. And I share my story more thoroughly in other videos, but today what I want to talk about is how much I felt like I needed to use control and willpower, and how absolutely certain I was that once I got my diet under control, I would get the binge eating under control, because I thought I couldn't trust my body. So I had to tighten up the reins on my diet. I felt like sugar made me crazy. I felt like I, as a person, needed to be controlled and evolved somehow so that I would be trustworthy. So what I actually ended up discovering after, spending more than half my life trying to control my diet, trying to perfect my diet, constantly diet hopping, hoping that, this one was going to be the one that would fix it, what I finally discovered was that control was actually the number one thing that was feeding into my disordered eating. And this was the last piece I discovered, because I had been to therapy and read all the books, and I was trying to slow down and be mindful, and I was meditating, and I was doing all of these things, and I could not keep myself from overeating, binge eating like a normal person around any food. Like, it wasn't even just certain foods like sugary foods or processed foods that I would overdo it on. It was everything. I could binge on carrots, I could binge on bananas, I could binge on green juice. It was out of control. So think about it like this. If I have a rubber band in my hands and I am pulling, stretching, eventually it's going to reach its max capacity and it's got to snap back or it's going to break. So this is what I was doing every time I went on a diet, tried to control myself, tried to keep myself in control, looking good on paper, within a certain weight, etc. Anywhere where I was trying to control myself, it was like I was pulling, and then eventually I would snap back I would snap out of control. And what was happening was that there was a part of me, a huge part of me, that would not stand for being controlled, that needed to eat more than I was giving it, that desperately wanted to be listened to, and I was not listening. My body was something that I was trying to control from the outside in rather than engaging with it from the inside out. So rather than being in relationship with my body, this thing that carries me around, this being that carries me around, I was looking at it from the outside and saying, you're too fat, you're too big, you're out of control, you're untrustworthy, you're this, you're that. I had a huge, massive list of things that either I was told or I came to believe at some point that was not acceptable. And so I was trying to control and mold myself into what I considered to be acceptable. We do not like to be controlled. We will rebel. And ultimately, people talk a lot about like the dark side or the shadow side, or people call the eating disorder ED or whatever, and they talk about it in a way that as if it needs to be controlled, or it needs to be gotten rid of, or if it needs to be shoved out. But really, there is no part of us that needs to be shoved out or controlled or gotten rid of or stuffed down. There are only parts of us that need to be seen clearly. Because once I began to see this part of myself clearly, this part of myself that I thought was self-sabotaging, which I no longer believe in. I do not believe that we self-sabotage, because whatever part of us we think is doing the self-sabotage truly and sincerely believes that it is doing the best thing for us. It is really the sweetest part of ourself, and we are just not seeing it clearly. So this part of me that I thought was self-sabotaging me needed to be seen, needed to be loved, did not need to be controlled, but needed to be taken care of so that she felt safe. And once every part of me was seen and felt safe and felt loved and was no longer being controlled and was being heard and listened to, and this meant getting rid of the scale, getting rid of the diets, getting rid of any ideas of how much was too much, and really getting in and listening. Once everything was heard and expressed, the binge eating no longer had a place. And mind you, there would have been a point in my journey where I would have taken all of this information and I would have tried to do all of the inner work while still controlling my diet, and it wouldn't have worked because my body needed to eat a certain amount of food, and no matter how much inner work I did, it still needed that amount of food. That may have been the number one key, the amount of food that I was so tightly controlling. Get rid of all of your ideas of how much you think is enough or too much or too little, and just go in and actually listen to the experience that you're having. Because often when we put a judgment on how much is too much, or if we think anything outside of my diet is overeating, or anything outside of this amount of calories is emotional eating, and we go over that, it brings in such a feeling of heaviness, and we feel this food sitting in our gut, and it's like, oh, I've overeaten. But really, it's your mind. It's your mind that has such a problem with it, which affects your belly, and it feels so much heavier than it is. People that don't struggle with body image issues don't feel that same heaviness. Like, it might be uncomfortable to overeat, they might be stuffing down some emotions, but it doesn't come with the like, oh my God, I feel so heavy, I overate, this is so awful. Relax into everything. Relax your control. Relax into your body. If you're overeating, relax into the overeating. If you're eating foods that you feel like don't make you feel good, relax into that. Get curious about everything. Get curious about binge eating if you're binge eating. If you are binge eating, slow down. Don't try and get rid of it. Don't try and get rid of anything. Get to know all of it. Get curious about all of it. Relax into all of it. Slow down with all of it. And then see what happens. See what happens when you are accepting yourself fully. It is magic, and it is unlike any other self-help, self-fixing, molding, controlling program that you've tried before. It is absolute magic. I hope that that's helpful. I have a class that I would like to offer you called The Number One Key to Healing Binge Eating, and we talk a lot about control. I'll give you a hint. It's control. That's the number one key, but I'm going to talk about it a lot more in depth. I'm going to have that link below along with my website. Please like and subscribe. I'll be sharing more videos at least weekly from here on out. If you have any questions or anything that you would like me to address via video, let me know down below, and I would be happy to help. All right, bye everyone.